I'm great. I'm great. Vasili is the founder of Changemakerslabs in Greece. Now, the issue of a startup ecosystem for migrant entrepreneurs is rather new if we compare it to the development of the startup ecosystems and the startup landscape in a way, right? And we're here on a quite ambitious mission of mapping this startup ecosystem, right? I mean, we are seeing more and more incubators, accelerators for refugee. We just heard the announcement of the launch of Egypt's incubator for refugees in the Middle East by Karim Samra. And we have, people working from Greece, people working in Africa and South Africa as well, people working in Europe, the Netherlands, Germany. How can we attempt to map this ecosystem? Where are the key players and where are we seeing successful stories? I'm going to ask Charlie as a first question. Charlie, what can you tell us? Where are the successful stories coming from?
Well, Valentina, I think, and your last panel showed this, I think this is a really exciting time to have this conversation. 4 years ago, when we were looking at the refugee ecosystem, startup ecosystem, it was noticeable how limited support programs there were, incubators, accelerators designed for refugee entrepreneurs that there were, not just in Europe, but globally, that were meeting the needs of refugee entrepreneurs, creating business solutions that gave a platform for the business talent that was coming through from this community. And what's so exciting about where we are now is that in the last 4 years, we have seen a huge amount of innovation, energy and momentum build in these programs around the world. So one of the networks that all three of our organizations is involved in is the Global Refugee Entrepreneurship Network. 3 years ago, there was only 19 organizations in that network from about 10 countries. Now there's almost 100 from about 40 countries around the world. And we're seeing huge growth in terms of both the sophistication of these programs and their reach into different regions where refugee populations and refugee entrepreneurs are.
Right. Now, I would love to share some stories that inspire. I mean, every time we hear or we interview a refugee and a migrant entrepreneur, we are overwhelmed with inspiration and with this idea that we want to do more. We want to do as much as they are doing, right? Vasili, can you share with us some stories from Greece?
Yes, thank you, Valentina. With pleasure. I want to start off with saying just meeting refugees themselves, any refugee, is extremely inspiring. What people have gone through and to see them doing the very best they can to establish a better future after losing everything, that alone is quite inspiring. Some stories that I would like to share with you of refugees here on Lesbos specifically and these are socially minded people. That they're in transition, so no one's actually looking to stay here, but yet some of the stories that come to mind is someone like Zakaria, who established a school in Moria, teaching 600 people every single day. And the passion and the drive that this guy had from the first day that I met him was just phenomenal. From having his vision to making it a reality, incredible. In Moria, building a school where 600 people were attending, including an art school, was pretty amazing. Another story I want to mention is a doctor who became a cook, cooking for 600 people, who's now opened his own restaurant and obviously supporting people that may not have access to food and so forth, but still supporting centers that actually make food. So, and one other story I want to mention is a mother with her 2 daughters who were, while she came to Lesbos, was filming and taking photos of weddings and so forth. So those are the really inspiring stories that come to mind.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that we're hearing these stories coming from places where all we hear is that there is conflict. All we hear when we talk about Lesbos, Greece, right? We hear about the refugee camps. We hear about it only in the frame of a humanitarian emergency, right? We very, very few times hear about the really inspirational stories and about all the things that they are actually doing, how they're taking control of their own future, how they're creating impact themselves as well, right? But we also can't deny that there's obstacles, that there is a lot of difficulties that they face. Laura, you have worked with many refugee entrepreneurs here in the Netherlands, and this year you've launched your global online incubator where you've worked with people all over the world.
Yeah.
What would you say is the main obstacle that you noticed repeating itself?
I would say that at the end of the day, it is just that we are all brought up in a different world, so to say. Like, we live on the same planet, but the way we are raised and these tacit rules of the game, you know, that are implicit and not so explicit, that's very hard for people to pick up on. Because when I see successful business people, they are not often like the highest IQ, but they have the best common sense. And what here is common is not common to the people. So that's where we need to take them a bit by the hand and support them. And yeah, for me, that's the biggest challenge.
Right, yes, indeed. When we talk about a startup ecosystem, and the reason why I personally find it fascinating is that there's so many pieces involved, right? Pieces that perhaps in and of themselves are not seen as so impactful, but then you have media, you have academia, you have, you know, all the supporting organizations, the incubators, the accelerators, you have the entrepreneurs and the investors, right? Do you feel that there is a missing piece? I'm going to direct the question to Charlie or Vasili. What do you feel is the missing piece here in the ecosystem?
Happy to start on that question. I think a big missing piece at the moment is really two main areas. One is access to customers. We see that refugees have a disadvantage when finding routes into market that allow them to access their first customers and build traction in their business, to build cash flow in their business that allows them to take their idea to scale. That's a disadvantage that they face against local entrepreneurs, and making sure that we can build pathways that convert into meaningful customer interaction and revenue, business revenue, is an essential step that is missing at the moment in the global ecosystem. We're seeing a lot of work being done on business idea validation, on connections to mentors, on connections increasingly to finance. But if we can't close the gap to customers, then we're at risk of undermining these businesses from day one. The other gap that we're seeing is access to credit. So although more and more business support programs are emerging, we're still seeing a huge gap between local entrepreneurs and refugee and migrant entrepreneurs in how they can access the credit they need to start their businesses, whether that be debt or equity. We know that refugee entrepreneurs struggle to access the mainstream financial institutions they need to start and sustain and grow their businesses. Right.
I think there's also the elephant in the room, which we cannot kind of overlook, which is COVID-19, right? It has had tremendous impact in every entrepreneur's business, but particularly with the case of refugees and migrants, it has been in a very powerful way, right? Laura, how have you seen that? And this is for all panelists. Have you found loops or ways in which we can overcome these difficulties?
I think that in a first instance, COVID was actually making the world in one way or another a bit more equal, in that everyone was a bit trapped in isolation. A lot of newcomers are isolated, and we saw that during the first wave here in the Netherlands, we really had the attention of business coaches and university students that support our entrepreneurs, because there was not that much going on. So our last cohort actually ran quite well because there was such a connect, you know, because everyone had kind of to deal with the same type of virus, whereas normally everyone has such a different story. And I also think that now is really the time for everyone that is at home to invest in your learning. That's really something you can do now. Invest in learning, growing, learning skills. Now is the time to do that.
Right. Charlie, Vasili, how have you been experiencing the impact of COVID?
Valentina, I'd like to add to say in terms of, and also link to what's missing in the social ecosystem. I think since 2015, we've seen people mobilize around the world to support asylum seekers. And now with 2020, with COVID, it's forced people, and especially corporates and governments, to start embracing technologies to get to people. And specific technologies that I'm talking about is education and healthcare. So the question is, how do we bring these stakeholders now to empower asylum seekers? And we heard Karim in the earlier panel saying about a program, the first of its kind, that's going to focus on not only empowering refugees, but also locals, but that can support and offer services to refugees. So, and I think services such as digital skills, there's 250,000 skill shortages alone in Europe. So how do we empower people to sit in a camp on Lesbos working for a company in New York? This is what technology offers. And I think now, because of COVID, people are made a lot more aware of it. And one last point, I mean, the ecosystem that you've brought together, it's been phenomenal, this event. And the people such that you've got as Microsoft, who's going to offer 100,000 jobs in Greece over the next 5 years. You've got Facebook that mentioned about empowering SMEs to become digitized. And the other one that you had, was Techstars as well, talking about that startups are not developing solutions for problems. And so from a Lesbos perspective, there's massive needs, massive problems. The asylum seekers and the locals understand best what the problems are. How do we bring the tech startups that Karim mentioned to Lesbos so that we can co-design and implement those solutions with the existing technologies? So I think it's now bringing those stakeholders together, and I think support for ecosystem builders is one of the missing links. So like your event, what you have done to bring all these stakeholders together, and what Laura and also Charlie have managed to do with Forward Incubator and TERN is super, super exciting, and we will start seeing a lot more impact. And I think the last point would be integration. But anyway, so yeah, very exciting times, and I think that we will be seeing a lot more impactful technologies actually getting into the market.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to see this sort of leveraged opportunity, right? These exciting times that this pandemic brought along. However, there's a missing piece here as well, and we are seeing more and more organizations that are being created to support refugees from the investor side, from the investment point of view. Last year, we had a panel with the Refugee Investment Network as well. And we're seeing more and more entities that focus on angel investment and early stage investment for refugees. The question is, are we seeing actual investments? What have you been seeing over here in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I think Diederik mentioned it before in the impact investment panel that we now have a cooperation with ABN AMRO. Of course, to have a bank, it immediately brings so much credibility to the startups that we present via ABN AMRO to their informal investors. So that is one opportunity that is great. And we will actually also have one startup from the MENA region pitch at that event, because to me, it's very important to just show that there's so much potential in that region and that the investors open their eyes to that sometimes overlooked region because of political instabilities. And the other thing is, I think also Charlie can add to that because they also did a lot of efforts with angel investors. We always advise the people, first, their business needs to make sense on paper, right? And then if you need external investment, make sure that you find someone that you really connect with and that you don't feel, restrained from calling if you have a problem, or someone that, is not just bringing money, but you should look for smart money, but also money with a heart, ideally. So just to have someone that honestly cares about you succeeding. And that we see that becoming better. So I'm very optimistic. I don't know if Charlie agrees.
Right, that's good to know. Charlie?
Yeah, Laura, I do agree with you completely. Don't worry. I think one of the things that we're seeing in the UK is that the gap in the investment infrastructure is not actually from a venture capital side, it's from an angel side. So the missing piece for our entrepreneurs in the UK is actually being able to find friends and family investment to prototype and test their ideas to get traction, which is to really emphasize what Laura was saying there, which is that the gap we're seeing between venture capital and the businesses emerging from the refugee community in the UK is that there's a lack of ability to be able to show traction in their business solutions that allows them to compete with venture capital. And to solve that problem, we need more angel investment to come into these businesses at an early stage when the propositions are higher risk, to take a chance on building these propositions out and getting them traction in the market before they go to some of the larger moves we're seeing around accessing venture capital for these entrepreneurs. The encouraging thing is that increasingly the pipelines of business talent from the refugee community is getting stronger, and we are seeing more angels look to invest into this community. So I think for us, the challenge is, can we make our business support program stronger to allow for these propositions to get stronger, to compete for these types of investment that are becoming more available through organizations like RIN and many others that are emerging across the continent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think adding to what you're just saying, Charlie, getting out of that narrative of the humanitarian narrative, right? This is something that probably we've all been facing, right? Refugee entrepreneurship, migrant entrepreneurship is often seen from a point of view, from a humanitarian point of view, as opposed to the opportunity that they are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Valentina.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just to say completely on that, the thing that we're seeing that is making movement around angels and angel investments is the recognition that diversity is a strength. There is no community that is more diverse than the refugee community in terms of nationalities, in terms of sectors, in terms of experience. And if you want to find competitive advantage in the current business investment landscape, you need to invest in diversity. And so it's from a position of strength, not a position of impact, that angels should look at this space.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. I wanted to hear from Vasili as well. Vasili, how are you experiencing over there in Greece this kind of double narrative around refugee entrepreneurship?
Thank you for the question, Valentina. So I think we are moving towards a hybrid model, and we need a hybrid model of mixed with grant funding and impact investment and or corporate social responsibility, because I think the initial, as I mentioned, the entrepreneurs that I mentioned are focused on impact. So, and even if we need to support them with equipment, products, and so forth for the initial start. So I really think that, and on a global level, we're moving towards a hybrid where you can have social impact initially with the view of becoming self-sustainable in the future. And I think that the golden opportunity is what technology brings, that you can have impact and make profit. So there's a convergence of a profit organization and a non-profit. It's coming together, and now we need the big funders to because they can't go and fund on a small level. So you almost need a level higher that the funding can come to, and that can reach grassroots organizations a lot quicker, because the big organizations, the World Banks and the like, they just don't, it takes too much manpower to go and find on the ground solutions. So by establishing these networks, we'll be able to get the funding quicker. And I think, again, just to reiterate, we definitely need a combination of grant funding and angel funding or impact investing funding. And the support services that Charlie also mentioned, and Laura, to support those people. Some of them they can't get bank accounts, they can't register to get a tax number. There are initiatives happening at this point in time, but a lot of the early stuff needs grant funding. And so there is, but it's in silos. So, we need to bring these stakeholders together.
Yeah. Right, right. And I think this is also very much related to what Laura said early today, right? The context is so different. The situation is so diverse in different contexts. I mean, we're talking about England, Netherlands, Egypt, Greece. The context is so different that sometimes that also implies very, very different models, whether it's from an impact point of view, whether it's from the opportunity point of view, right? Now, I wanted to kind of close, and then we move to our questions from the audience, but how much does it make sense to talk about an ecosystem of migrant and refugee entrepreneurs, right? Because we're working with social integration. We're working to bring people together, right? So we don't want to create this idea of a separate cluster. But at the same time, we really want to highlight this ecosystem that really has no borders, that is happening all over the world at the same time and join forces. So, Laura, how much do you think it makes sense to talk about one ecosystem, and how can we frame this?
I think it makes complete sense, because it's just that if you are a newcomer, so you are new to a country, you just need that additional layer of support, right? And that additional layer of support also makes it that at first you need a lot of input, and the output might come way later. That's also why we are dependent on grant funding, because from a commercial point of view, it just doesn't work, right? So what we see is that we need to develop a very strong support ecosystem for newcomers, but that we also work hand in hand with the traditional startup system. And it's so nice what you said at the beginning of the panel was that normal, so to say, startup ecosystem is a bit more mature, right? So we can really tap into these resources and to that potential. And I also think that all refugee incubators should benchmark themselves with commercial incubators in a way. not in terms of metrics, but just that you have the same types of program activities, right? That you always just look to become better and offer top-notch training and do not say like, yeah, we do not have to be as good. So it's also, I think it ties back to the ambition that all of us have to deliver good programs that then in turn will deliver good businesses.
Definitely, definitely. Charlie and Vasili, what do you think?
From my side, I think it's essential. I think it's...
Oh, Charlie.
Thanks, Vasili. Sorry. So I think from my perspective, it's essential. It's building a global ecosystem allows us to connect a global community. And although that community is incredibly diverse and faces very localized barriers and obstacles that we need to build solutions for, the strength is in the global community. And I think that's what we can turn the narrative around and say, actually, a global community of 25 million refugees carries a huge amount of business power. And that power is amplified the more we connect across borders, the more we connect solutions across borders, and the more we connect businesses across borders. And that's what's really exciting today, is to see businesses connecting internationally to build international opportunities, because that's the next phase of this development. We can't just build national, local businesses. We need to build international businesses, because the community has the potential to do that. And we as support organizations need to have the capacity to build international scaled organizations. And that's, I think, where we have the opportunity to do it.
Right, right. Vasili, you were saying something as well?
Yes, so completely agree with both Laura and Charlie. I think it's really important to be focused on the refugee community. At the same time, we also need to focus from integration perspective of how we can bring the people into contact with locals. And the model, again, that Karim mentioned about an accelerator program that has locals working with refugees that are solving challenges linked to refugees. So I would almost take it and say a social economy accelerator program, so solving social challenges, because if you can solve the challenges that refugees have, you'll be able to solve most societal challenges in terms of access to healthcare, education, and so forth. And in terms of startups without borders, we would very much love to be working with you in your ecosystem on Lesbos or wherever suits best to establish the best practices of leading impactful tech solutions that are solving these problems. And we can help accelerate these to other regions, because the tech exists. We need to come together to co-design and implement these solutions, and through the strategic partners, help accelerate those.
Right. Yes, definitely. Definitely we should join forces. We need to be working together on this. We have a lot of questions from the audience. Nahla is asking, outside the tech scene, do you think the startup ecosystem is supporting migrants and refugees who have the talent or skill, but are unable to scale or start a business and even go digital? How is the ecosystem supporting this group?
So outside of high growth, what we see is that, well, we work with most of our business are not high growth tech startups, right? So our experience is really with people that are focused not on livelihood businesses, but they want to do something also often to give back for communities back home. What we see is that we, here in the Netherlands at least, we always see that we find someone that is happy to support us if we reach out. And I think that's very positive. And of course, I'm in my own bubble of people that are willing to help and to support. So I don't know if Vasili or Charlie have different experiences, but here we always have the support that we need so far.
Yeah, we have another question which is in the same kind of line. James is asking, more often than not, it seems the tech startups are taking the front line. But what about startup ideas that are not building businesses solely focused on tech? Charlie?
Yeah, absolutely. As Laura says, that's 90% of our community. 90% of the entrepreneurs we work with are not building tech solutions or tech businesses. So any support ecosystem that is worth its salt is building programs that meet the needs of non-tech businesses. And the way that you do that is by allowing them to get access to customers, to get feedback quickly, and to build valid and viable ideas. An essential step for us in allowing them to do that is similar to what Laura was saying, is connections to mentors, entrepreneurs, consultants from the local ecosystem, from the local community, that allow those ideas, regardless of if they're tech or not, to become viable. And I think that's an essential point, is that any support ecosystem, and the majority of the ones that we know in our networks that are partners with organizations like Changemakers and Forwards, are connected to solutions that are focused on non-tech businesses and making sure that they can build revenue through support from local entrepreneurs and local mentors.
Right, right. Sophia is asking, how do you see crowdfunding to allow those early stage investments? Pros, cons, and challenges. Vasili?
So finding, like I said, for the early stage funding from a Lesbos perspective, at this point in time, it needs to be grant funding and or angel investment funding. So,
have you seen equity crowdfunding in Europe as well?
Crowdfunding, we have seen 1 or 2 entrepreneurs that did that. I think if you have a very strong story, and of course every refugee has a really strong story, always a story of resilience. So that's definitely something that is interesting to work with, because also you do not need a lot of resources to get it going. You just need a phone and, you film yourself, film your story, you talk about your ambition. So I think crowdfunding is always a very interesting idea. And of course, you do not have someone early on that can potentially dictate how you have to run your business, but you can really steer it in the right direction. So I think it's a very powerful tool to use.
Definitely.
And Valentina, just quickly on that front, one of the major credit organizations in the refugee space is Kiva, that doesn't operate in Europe, but operates very much in Africa and Latin America with refugee entrepreneurs, which is primarily looking at crowdfunding, small micro crowdfunding for startup and entrepreneurs looking to launch businesses in those markets. In the UK, we don't invest in crowdfunding solutions because we think that the time and energy to facilitate crowdfunding campaigns is not a particularly efficient way of raising capital. Yeah. That's our own personal perspective. We think there's more effective ways to connect refugee entrepreneurs into credit and into capital and crowdfunding, but in other markets it's very different. And I would highly recommend any entrepreneurs in those markets looking at Kiva as a way of accessing supporters for crowdfunding campaigns.
Right, right.
Maybe I can just add to it. Like, we as Forward Incubator, we started from crowdfunding ourselves. So we raised ourselves 5,000 euros, and then we started activities. So, and for us, it was really just recording a short video and then spreading it and connecting with people over our mission. And that was a bit over 3 years ago. So I think it's, if you have a good story to tell, I think it can definitely work.
Right, right. Belinda is asking, who is working on training financially successful members of migrant communities to become angel investors? Very keen to connect with what I believe would be powerful movement to harness early stage and beyond funding.
So from migrant communities themselves, like highly successful people, and you match them with...
To train them to become investors. I believe in England there is included VC, right?
Yeah, there's included VC, who I think are in the summit today, Valentina, who are targeting doing that by connecting migrant and refugee background individuals into some of the leading VC firms around Europe. They had their first cohort of 30 angel investors from marginalized backgrounds that finished just this year. They just recruited for another 30 new angel investors. There's also a company called Ada Ventures, which is a seed stage investor in the UK looking at diverse communities. They've just given £50,000 to 5 diverse background angels in the UK to start building their portfolios. So we're seeing increasingly ways that the venture capital industry is investing in diverse communities by giving them capital and knowledge to begin to build their own portfolios. And that's really exciting. So if you're looking at ways in, I would look at those organizations to spotlight them. And the other opportunity I'd look at is Backstage Capital in the US, who are doing really amazing work in building and supporting diverse business leaders to build their own angel portfolios. So allowing entrepreneurs to build not only their own businesses, but their own investment portfolios to invest in the up and coming entrepreneurs, not just their own success. And that's really exciting. And the angel syndicates that we're building in the UK, it's a starting point. We want to bring capital into diverse entrepreneurs to build their portfolios, not just the pre-existing angels who have their own well-established portfolios, tend to be from white backgrounds and from lower stage professional careers.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And adding to what you just said, so both Backstage Capital, we have Chris Tipitz and Nikita from Included VC, they're both participating in panels, so you can network with them within the platform at the summit as well. We also have Unconventional Ventures. Nora is giving a panel as well today, so feel free to connect on the networking lounge. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we ran out of time for questions. Laura, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Vasili. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Valentina. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Great to see you.
Thank you very much, Valentina.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Stay connected, stay tuned, because we have a very exciting session coming up. I'm sure you know this brand. I'm sure you've heard of it if you are working in the entrepreneurship field. Get in the ring. We're going to discover how do you build a brand and a global movement. Stay tuned.